All right, people, welcome to another episode of Natty News Daily. We have a special guest with us tonight, WNBF Pro Connor St. How are you, man?
Hey Leroy, I'm good. Thanks for having me on. You hit me up at just the right time. I got a little bit of spare time going, so I was like, you know, first chance I got, I was like, let's do it, let's go. I haven't been as vocal as I've had been in the past, so yeah, it's a cool chance to catch up with you guys.
Yeah, you actually, I guess when you posted that throwback there the other day, I was like, I wonder how Connor's doing. Because you're right, you haven't posted a whole lot. You haven't been as active. You know, you were doing your little podcast for a little bit, and that wasn't popped up. So I was like, man, I'm gonna reach out and see if he's got some free time. And like you said, it lined up well. So that's good. I'm happy.
Right on, man. Yeah, I kind of just lost my way for a little bit there. And we can go into it if you want the details, but I had some setbacks in the last month or so. As far as the podcast I was doing, I just decided to kind of shut that down for the moment. It was just a little bit too time intensive.
Yep.
Try and book a guest every week, come up with topics, do all the thumbnails and editing and stuff. And then I'm doing this, man, and I'm like making spelling errors and posting it up, and people are like, oh, you spelled my name wrong. And I'm like, shit, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You put so much work into it. And then to do it well, man, it's just, it's a time commitment. So kudos for you for being really consistent with your content, Leroy. That's awesome. You haven't slowed down one bit. That's awesome to see, man.
This podcast is, James can attest to this. This has taken many iterations, but I think we finally now have a bit of a system now where we have like set times to do this. Because for a while it was like one of us would be like, we should do a podcast, and then it's trying to coordinate schedules. Like you said, trying to find a guest and stuff is challenging, right? So
no,
at least with myself and James and Dan, who will be on here soon, we kind of have we have definitely a time that we can do this. And then, if we can get guests on, we try to do that. But it's tough, man. It's tough pumping out content and trying to be interesting, for lack of a better term. Because I don't know about you guys, but bodybuilding, it's like with trying to do vlogs for YouTube and stuff. Like if you just live a normal life, James and I have talked about this, like, if you just have a normal job and a family and stuff like that, like what am I going to vlog? Like I can only post my workouts, which are the same every week, my food, which is the same every day. Like that's not interesting. I'm not in Dubai or anything like that. So,
but people still watch it. I mean, I'm not going to name names because we know Leroy will censor me if I do, but like there are a lot of people that their YouTube content, that's exactly what it is, but people love it. And I think you have to remember though too, that just because it seems so normal, natural, and easy for us, every time you post a video, there's going to be new people that are like just coming onto the scene that are seeing it. So it's like revolutionary for them, like, oh, why is he tracking that? Why is he doing his steps? Why is he, whatever, like all the things are like, well, duh, like, of course.
Yeah, it's I don't know, it's weird. So I can respect that for you, Connor, because it's probably something we all go through from time to time.
Absolutely, man.
So let's just start with, I guess, what's going on with you the last 3-4 months. What's 2021 looked like for you? There's Dan right there.
Hey Dan.
Okay, I'm almost
dragging us down as always.
The weak link of the group. Anyways, Connor, how are you doing the last few months?
So I'll try and I'll give you a decent overview of what went on. I don't want to go into too much detail because it might just sound kind of like whining at some points, but I was doing quite well. I was going through with my off season, and I remember I spoke with you and Breton. I think it was right around Christmas time, and I was like, well, I'm going to push my weight up a little bit further and see how it goes, and I feel pretty good about it. And I did have plans to compete this year, but obviously it was still, the COVID stuff was still happening, so it was kind of like, well, I'm not really sure what's going to go on, was my idea at the time. So I did push up my body weight fairly decently high, 205, 207. I'm 5'11", so I've been heavier in the past, but this wasn't quite as heavy as I gotten, but it was good. I felt good about it, and I started to actually diet a little bit in April, and I dieted for about 4 weeks, and I was liking what I was seeing, the progress. I thought things looked good, and I was, I hadn't, shared a lot lately, but I was looking forward to posting, kind of my progress as I was making it there, dieting down, seeing the lines start to come back in. but I hit a few snags. So one of the things that happened to me in the gym, a little bit of an entry, was I was doing a single arm lat pull down on a cable station, and I was using a dumbbell on my lap as a counterbalance, right? I got this from actually Kasim's page, and I really do like it to hit the lats that way. But I had actually a 100-pound dumbbell on my lap to stabilize, and I kind of jumbled it up, and I was holding it like this, so there was no good way to get it off. So I kind of cradled it in my hands, and then I had to kind of catch it with my bicep like this, and it just messed up the tendon there, and that set me back for a little bit because I couldn't really train my biceps in the lengthened position. I couldn't train a lot of back movements with that arm, so I had to find some workarounds. And then in the meantime with that, I got quite sick. I had a really bad sinus infection. And this is, I don't want to spend too much time on this. This is going to be like a rant, but I had to run 2 rounds of antibiotics to finish it. And I also, at the same time, I got my second dose of the COVID vaccine. And I think I had a little bit of side effects from that, some fatigue. So a lot of days in May, I would go into the gym and I'd try and train around this bicep, or I would just try and train hard in general. And I just get super fatigued. Dealing with the sinus infection, the COVID stuff, the COVID vaccine, and that going all on at once. So the whole month of May, I kind of went backwards. It seemed like it was.
That's
it was
a
really
shit
tough.
show, man.
Yeah, it was just a bunch of stuff happening at once, and I was doing really well for the past even like 2 years. I had no issues. It was just straight. I was either cutting or bulking, or I was going in one direction and it was going well. But everything just kind of happened at once there, and it was really hard to be productive in my training with it. And then once I was able to get through this stuff and work through the bicep stuff, which actually shout out to James, because I actually hired him to do a web consult about that, and it was very helpful. And since then, it's gotten a lot better. So
awesome.
But when I did, as I was coming around to getting better, and especially just getting over the sinus infection and finding a few workarounds for the bicep before it has been healing, I started to just do a little bit more dieting, because I had it in my mind I was just going to diet down to about 185 and then see where the world was for the COVID stuff. Mm-hmm. And I kind of, as I was sick the last month, in May, I just maintained, because I didn't want to diet with all this subpar training. So I continued to diet, and I just finished that up the other day. I hit 185 really, really flat. And I'm just not happy with the look, especially with that month of like really poor training, and then going into a deficit for another month after that. I'm not happy with the look. And it serves as a reminder to me that you can't just, diet from nothing. You got to be kind of, built up a little bit. And I was in the peak of my off season, but then that whole month of diminished training, I'm not super confident with what I have right now. So going back to the drawing board into a surplus now. I shut down the competition goals for this year, even though it seems like a lot of the shows will run as things are turning around. I'm not 100% certain everything will happen, but it does look really good. Yep. But I'm just not happy with what I have, and I'm not willing to go through the stress of a maybe during a prep. So I'm going to shut it down for 2022. I don't really know what that means for being a pro in the WNBF anymore. I may have to requalify in 2022, but I've kind of gotten over that now, and I'm all right with it. And if, I have to come back and do, a pro qualifier to try and get that qualification and compete at the pro level, that's fine, man. I'm cool to do that. If I improve over the next, if I've improved since 2019, it should be a physique that could probably win most amateur pro qualifiers. At least I would hope. And it depends who shows up. There's freaks everywhere, but I'm just kind of over needing that label, I guess. It was such an important thing to me for a long time, and it still is important, but I think I can get over it and, come back in 2022 and be better. So there's my long-winded rant for everything that happened, people. Sorry if it was too much.
That was good. That's actually a good segue into what, I wanted to talk about, and that is kind of the waiting game in bodybuilding, and not, rushing things and rushing to the stage, for example, for yourself, right? If you were so hard pressed to get on stage this year, from the sounds of it, it probably would have been a very rough prep, and B, you probably wouldn't have been happy with the final product. So, all four of us can weigh in on this, because in some form or another, we've had times that we've waited for the stage or waited for a prep or whatever. So let's start with Dan, because you've been a long time away from the stage. So weigh in on, I guess, what has prevented you from competing for so long, your rationale behind it, your mindset behind it, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so first I'll respond to Connor, like, especially like for you, like making your pro debut, like I'm sure you want to come in like on top of your game, like you want to bring something that's legit. But for me, yeah, I mean last competition season was 2018. Knew that like in general, like I think this is a Jeff Alberts, like competing is basically cashing out. It's like cashing out the bank account. So, you got to spend a lot of time in a surplus and actually gaining. I mean, it's bodybuilding. So, when you're dieting, you're not building any muscle. You're basically just trying to retain it and get lean. But yes, I knew I needed a few years. I knew a few productive years would be good for me to put on some lean tissue, especially on my upper half. A few years of lots of sleep, lots of training, lots of eating, that certainly would be permissive to an improved physique from last time around. And I've been more on my game the last like 3 years than I was prior to my 2018 season. Not that I was completely off my game, but I dabbled a little bit in powerlifting and did some other stuff, and wasn't quite as committed to like the sleep schedule and everything like that. So the last 3 years have been pretty close to like almost fully on point. So, and the physique has definitely like come to life because of that. So
did you feel any pressure to compete earlier than maybe you'd want to?
This year.
Not from us.
No, not from you guys. No, but you guys kind of know. I haven't made a formal announcement or anything, but it's probably known at this point. I've talked to a few people, but you guys kind of know what's going on. But yeah, and like 2019, obviously I was absolutely not going to compete in 2019. Like I had to spend like the first half of 2019 just recovering from my 2018 season. So I didn't really feel normal. Like my last show was in December. I didn't really feel normal, quote unquote, until like April-ish, really. Mm-hmm. So, that was pretty much out. And 2020, I guess I could have competed, but I knew I wanted to do either 2021 or 2022. That was kind of like, I needed an extended period of time to put on a decent amount of tissue. Mm-hmm. Like I said, especially through my upper half, which I've certainly done. I mean, I put tissue on my lower half too, but especially like through my delts and whatnot, it's been productive. So definitely paid dividends. So
cool. All right, let's go to you, James. You're in the thick of it right now, if anybody is. I guess touch on your time frames within the sport when it comes to competing. What's rationale for the breaks that you've taken and potentially will take after this season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I probably rushed things in the beginning, so I might have a little bit different perspective, because I went into my first competition not really knowing what I was doing. I had been like working out for sports performance for a few years, but not really necessarily bodybuilding in any smart sense that I would, looking at what I was doing now. So I had never really officially bulked. I had never officially run a competition cut, and I coached myself. So that was everything I could do wrong, I did do wrong, but I'm glad I did it that way, because it got me into the sport and I fell in love with it, with all the errors and everything, still loved it. So that was November 2017. And then in a quick turnaround, I then competed in the spring of, what was that? 19? Yeah. Spring of 19 into June of 19. Put on a good amount of mass, because I was, at that point, the knowledge that I had after that first show was, exponentially increasing, because I was so dedicated into learning this. But then from there was when I saw the greatest improvements, which we're now seeing. And, so now that was June of 2019 was that last show. I went into a a surplus from that point until January of 2021. So about a year and a half, no mini cuts, no deficit, just like slamming food, and got my weight to levels that I probably won't touch again, but I think it was necessary because I'd never done that before. I'd never had that true bulk to really push things to what they could do. And we really weren't, the plan was never this year I'm going to compete. It was once I've reached a look that we're happy with, that's when I'll compete.
Sure.
So we did finally run a mini cut starting January of 2020 and got down from like 215 or 205 to 185 and looked really good. Obviously COVID was happening, so we weren't going to compete, but it gave me like the idea that, all right, like it's a waiting game now. So now it's, when will this fit my lifestyle? When will this fit, the social circumstances and the circumstances of the world? So
yep.
I think people get too caught up on, I'm going to take a year off, I'm going to take a year and a half off. It's like, if you're taking time off to improve, why don't you objectify what those improvements are going to be and make sure that you have visually before you actually dive into a full contest prep, because it's a commitment.
Yeah, you touched on that, right? Where it's like, if we're happy with the look, then I'll compete. Whereas, if someone sets, a time frame, they're like, okay, I'm going to start prep in April, and like April comes around and you're like, subconsciously or consciously, you're like, I'm not happy with the look, but then you pursue the prep, it's not going to end how you want it to, more than likely, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if we would have done that mini cut, I would have got to 185 and then like, I look the same. No chance would I be competing right now. But we saw what we wanted to see, and now we're trying to play it out here.
All right, Connor, for yourself, your situation is an interesting one, kind of similar to me, at least anyways, last year, whereas you wanted to compete, you were trying to compete, but the world said no. I guess from that point to now, your mindset has obviously changed, for numerous reasons. So, talk about that a little bit and where things are at for yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Just like, the idea of the weighty game in general, it is kind of like, I'd say, a theme in natural bodybuilding and just bodybuilding in general, or really any, hobby or skill you want to develop, right? You got to put a lot of the background work into it. But the thing that's on my mind lately too, I just want to get this thought out of my head and, before it leaves, is just like, when it comes to like, when you get to the advanced stages at this sport, you're only like just a few bad decisions away from kind of going backwards, right? Because what you're kind of clawing for is like this extra like 2% of muscle mass. Like that's probably what's on the table after you've trained for, if you've done a good job of training for a decade, you're probably, that's probably around where it is, right? And you have to have all the circumstances line up, right? So you're probably going to be in a surplus. Your training has to be, pretty damn perfect. You probably want to prioritize the body parts that need to be prioritized and deprioritize the ones that are already strong, right? So you got to have a really good plan. And then all of a sudden, life gets in the way, right? And you don't even make that 2%. You may even slip backwards, right? And that's kind of a pessimistic view on things, But like just recently, that was what happened to me, was just a reminder of this. Like you can just make one kind of like little slip up in the gym and all of a sudden you can't train, a body part for a few weeks, right? You can get sick, you can get COVID, right? You can, and be out of the gym for a while, and it might take you, a month or two just to get back on track, right? Or do you even just feel like you can train again? So I think, most competitors who truly love this sport would probably like to compete, yearly or maybe even more than yearly, but sometimes life circumstances don't allow for it to be progressive, if you do that. And, everyone knows, like, even like with the natural gains, is they're so small, to get that quantifiable, amount of gains from season to season, you need to have a decent amount of time there, right? And obviously some of the enhanced people, they can get away with competing more often than once per year, but even those guys, some of them will slip from show to show if they don't take care of business. Like there's years where like Ronnie Coleman did the Arnold and then did the Olympia, and then he was like downsides for the Olympia because he put everything into the Arnold prep, right? So I mean, even those guys need to play it, pretty smart, pretty strategic, right? So it kind of just is what it is. And I've been in this sport for so long, I've kind of just learned to embrace it. And some of my competing aspirations in 2020 was more so about trying to get that pro debut in. And I just kind of I didn't get a chance to do it in 2019 when I won it. and they had that 1 year cap. And I just felt like it was, even though the timeline wasn't ideal, the life circumstances were all right for it. But then COVID hit, right? So then it was a wash, right? And I just got back into a surplus.
Do you think you would have, if they didn't have that 1 year requirement that you have to compete within a year, do you think you would have wanted to compete within the year? I mean, obviously they waived it, but
yeah,
looking back,
I would have preferred 2 years probably. Yeah.
Okay, because that's what I did. Yeah, I was like, yeah, I'm done. I'm shutting it down. I'm waiting.
Yeah, man. And I mean, I think if you account for the recovery and then the acclimation period, you kind of need to like get to a higher body weight. And like I said, get that 2% more muscle mass that's on the table. It probably is a timeline that goes a little further than a year, but it's also individual because it depends how fast you recover. And I mean, I know what you're saying when you said it took you that long to feel like normal. And I don't think I've taken that long before, but there is like definitely a period where like, even if you feel normal afterwards, you probably still need to put some leg work in the gym to get back your muscle mass exactly where it was. Cause most people are going to probably get, some slight losses towards the end. So I just think in most situations, the timeline favors a little bit longer, but there will be people who can do it in 1 year and make it look cool. And then it can get popular, and some people can try it. Some people might succeed. Others might feel like they would invest, would have done better at investing more time. And it's just like anything, like if you invest more time into it, it's going to be a better, end result if you spend more time investing than you do cashing out. Right. So it just depends what you need, right? Or what you feel like you want to do for your career as a competitor.
That was a good analogy right there. And that kind of echoes my competitive life. So I started competing the end of 2015. I did 2 shows right back to back. Then come out of it, spring 2016, come up, fall 2016, come up, spring 2017, that was it. And then 18, I took off. I did powerlifting that year. But for basically like 2015 right to 2018, like it was compete, come up, compete. And it was like, I think the novelty of it, like the excitement of, oh, this is new, I was doing really well. So I had that positive reinforcement from a placings perspective. It really kind of pushed me to just keep competing. And whether it was, healthy obviously is a whole different story. And, life circumstances during those times were probably up and down when maybe they didn't need to be, but I was just so focused and invested in it. Right. And then, 2019. So I took 2018 and the latter half of 17 off, which was good. And then 2019 was a return to the stage, which was a definite improvement from, competitive times prior to that. And then, similar to yourself, 2020, I tried, but it didn't pan out. And then that's when I started working with Cliff. And, Cliff's been someone that, I look up to as not only a coach, but as a mentor. I think from a mindset perspective, emotional intelligence, like he's someone that I, when we do our coaching calls, it's like 5 or 10 minutes about me competing. And then it's like life shit and coaching and, all that kind of stuff. So, one of the things he told me was like, he's like, you need time away. You need a good amount of time away. I think if you really invest in that, like you said, if you invest when you cash out, it'll be a lot better. So, from that point on, it was kind of a switch where it's like, okay, I don't need to compete. Like I felt like I needed to, whether it was, for me inside, or if it was like, oh, I need to like prove it to other people or be in the spotlight, whatever it was, I felt that need to compete. And don't get me wrong, I don't regret it. Trust me. But when you see it from the other side, you can kind of look at it and be like, what are you doing there, kid? And, right now, this little mini cut, I said, I took some photos the other day. I've sent them to James and Dan, and it was probably the first time I really looked at photos and genuinely was like, all right, like, we've done something
big difference.
Yeah. Not only that, like obviously the difference from, season to season was huge, but I actually felt like I looked like a bodybuilder, which is like, for people that are listening, that might sound really weird, but I think all of us can probably echo that statement at some point. We've looked at photos and be like, man, you actually look like you've done something. And
Yeah,
I kind
I'm
of
starting
like
to feel like that in the last year. Like I'm like, okay, I feel like I actually look
for sure.
Look the part.
Yeah, and I feel like right now I feel really good, which I think, and Cliff had said that you'll get to a point where you just feel good. And I think from competing for so long, and then on the other side pushing up in the off season, which doesn't feel great either. I'm like, man, like I was really excited to start prep, but now I'm like, not that I'm reserved from it, but I'm I feel good. I'm not overly focused on like food choices. You know what I mean? We had friends over on the weekend. Like I had ice cream cake. We had a barbecue. Training's going really well. My sleep is good. All these things are just really good right now. And like, I don't want to ruin it, but I want to check off that pro card next year. And that's, I don't know if we were live when I had said it, but like after next year, we'll probably be a pretty extended time away from the stage. But I just feel like intrinsically I need to kind of check that box before I can move away from bodybuilding for a bit. And probably similar to you, Connor, where I was like, I need to check off that pro debut. But then when that couldn't happen, circumstances outside of your control, you kind of got over it.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, whenever it happens, if I have to requalify, whatever, what is what it is.
Yeah.
And that's, for me for next year, I'm like, okay, I kind of want to hit ABC and then just like get this feeling again and live relatively normally. Right. And, we're getting married in the fall, next probably year or two, it'll be a family. And that stuff starts to kind of just creep higher up on the priority list. Right. And that's something, James and myself have talked about a lot because he's in that position where it's like, for me, throughout my competitive career, I've always been in relationships, don't get me wrong, and they've always been very important. But I feel like bodybuilding might have been just up there a bit more for so long. And like, whether that's good or bad is a totally different story. But now it's starting to kind of just like, I do bodybuilding, but I'm not a bodybuilder. I don't know if that's the phrase I want to use, but that's kind of how I feel. Right? Like there's more to me than that. And that's why I'm okay with like waiting and, compete next year. But then it's like, man, it might not be till 2025. Right?
A question popped into my mind because I'm considering it for myself too. And I just kind of thinking about it as we're having this discussion, but how do you feel about the WNBF's kind of like system of them wanting to have their pros compete every 2 years? Like, could you see yourself being happy competing every 2 years, like throughout the rest of your 20s and your 30s? Like, does that sound good to you? Or do you want to just check off a pro debut and just kind of maybe come back when you're really feeling into it?
Yeah. I mean, like, my perfect scenario next year is pro card, pro debut, done. Line those shows up, whether they're 2, 3, 4, 8 weeks apart, and check that stuff off my bodybuilding bucket list. And then what happens after that, you know what I mean? I know, like, I feel like I know guys that have kept their pro cards for a lot longer than they've competed, but I could be wrong. I don't know if you just need to pay. I don't know all the intricacies there, but I guess to answer your question, every 2 years, like to me, that's just, like say I win my pro card next year and then I want to compete in 2 years. I have a 2-year-old. Like I don't think I'd want to do that. Not gonna lie.
To be honest, I don't know. And, I don't know if the WNBF will hear this or not. I think they renew the pro cards for some and they might not for others, depending on competitive history. Honestly, sometimes maybe popularity, although I'm not 100% sure, but I think if you're like a pro show winner by them, you're probably going to get your pro card renewed past that 2-year mark. But I really don't know exactly what their criteria is for it. And
that's something, that I mean, I'll say right now, I don't agree with. I think that, for me to, or for anybody, right? I'm not going to say me. For you, let's take you for example. For you to earn that pro card, you are a pro natural bodybuilder within that organization, but because you don't compete in 2 years, you're not a pro anymore. Like, I don't understand that. I don't agree with it. I think that, like, what it like unforeseen circumstances. What if for some random reason you couldn't financially make it happen?
Yeah.
Like, how is that? Like why should that even be an issue, right?
Yeah.
Like I couldn't make it work, couldn't pay for it. Sorry, couldn't pay for it. Well, sorry.
Yeah, and it'd be a different game if you were getting paid for it. So it's like, yeah.
Well,
I'm with you, Leroy.
That's like
And I mean, like,
I'm sure
looking
with
at
a lot of enhanced athletes, right? There's sponsorships, there's endorsements and stuff like that. Like that probably weighs into a lot of it, right? I know of guys that have gotten paid to do their shows because it's going to bring an audience or name value or whatever. I can maybe empathize with that. We're not in that situation, so I don't see why that rule needs to be in place, because I don't think many other organizations do that. I know Dan, the OCB doesn't. Once you turn pro, you're pro.
I wouldn't have been able to compete this year. I wouldn't be able to compete this year because I would have competed in 2018 and it would have been 3 years. So yeah.
Yep.
However, the OCB does force you to maintain that membership, so you still have to pay your dues.
I had to pay the dues.
Like
that.
Yeah,
I mean, whatever, was it like $100 a year?
Yeah, something like that.
WNBF is about that much. Yeah.
Sure. I mean,
I still don't agree with it though. I think I can get over it, but I think
it's the principle of it. It's not the dollar. It's the principle.
You're forcing me. It's pay to play, right? Like I've earned this. It is now my right to choose when I want to do so. And if the problem is that you're not getting enough people to compete, so your organization is suffering financially, well, then that's on you to incentivize the athletes to compete. That's not on the athlete to feel obligated to compete.
Totally.
Yeah.
So
I'm with you on that. I mean, I pay it, but especially like years that I'm not competing, like the last 2 years I haven't competed. I paid the dues, but knew I wasn't competing because I wanted to, be able to pull the trigger when I could, or when I wanted to,
Well, and that I mean can only probably increase the quality of the athletes, right? Like you look at yourself, Dan. If you had have rushed to compete, I mean, you probably would have been better for sure, but nowhere near to where you are now. Same with Connor, right? If Connor felt obligated to compete, say this year, right? Say that the timeline worked up to this year, with your sickness and your injury and stuff like that, like you wouldn't have been the Connor that won his pro card, right? Maybe you were the same, maybe a little bit worse, but that's not what you should want as a federation. I want the best Connor. I want the best Dan.
Yeah, man, for sure. And I mean, it's just, you put so much time and effort into this, you want it to be your best. And I don't feel good about going into a prep unless I've kind of checked all the boxes. And, I need that kind of confidence and fire behind it. I need that like progressive off season, coming into the contest prep to just be like, yes, like I'm excited to what I'm going to bring. And that's the fuel that drives me throughout, the hardships of the prep. But yeah, I mean, to get back to what you're saying about the federation fees, it's like, it is only the WNBF that does that to my knowledge. And I think they kind of talk about it as a way to keep like pros that maybe won a pro show or won a pro qualifier in like 2001 to prevent them from coming back into like 2020 and doing a pro show without having to requalify. And I remember too, like, backstage, a gentleman in my class in New York, he was a former WNBF pro, and he said they wanted him to requalify. And like to my knowledge, that's why that rule is there. I don't know if it's that big of a deal. Like if the guy was in the pro class, he just would have placed where he placed and he would have paid the pro entry fee.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess they have their own reasons for it, financially, and, maybe they just want to keep it a smaller league of pros. I'm really not sure, but it would be interesting for someone to kind of maybe like grill. I think his name is Bob and Tina Bell. They're the ones that are the presidents. I'd be curious to hear it directly from them. And I know Eric Helms did do a podcast with them, but they didn't really talk about that. So I would have liked that to be brought up, honestly.
Oh, for sure.
Leroy.
Make it happen. Make it happen.
I'll slide into the DMs.
Mm-hmm.
All right, boys. Timer says we got 3 minutes left. Any closing thoughts? Any words of wisdom with regards to like playing the time frame game within bodybuilding and not feeling obligated to maybe compete as frequently as the outside world may want you to, when inside you're like, I'm not there yet.
Don't go into a prep willy-nilly. I mean, we all know it. I think first time competitors don't really understand, if you want to do it right, how serious it can be and how much it can change. I mean, I don't go into too much detail on like some of my personal aspects, but my last prep almost cost me a degree. And I was in a bad place mentally and academically there for a little bit because I just did not have the energy or the emotional balance, if you will, to make decisions, you know. And I was at that point not a licensed professional, but I was taking care of people, and it wasn't good. It wasn't smart. So there's a big commitment to doing this.
I agree with that.
Beautiful
And
way to
I
end
think
it.
once you've competed, you kind of understand that. But yeah, until you really get to that level of body fat where it just affects you
everywhere
across all facets, it's
Yeah.
like you don't really understand, you know, what it takes to compete. So it's different than any other endeavor or sport, really.
Yep.
You know, it's
awesome. All right, people. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Thank you, Connor, for joining us on this episode of Natty News Daily. If you guys like the episode, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel for future ones, and don't forget to follow us on Instagram at natty_news_daily. We are over 5,300 followers, which is pretty damn cool. So thank you, and we'll see you guys in the next one.